Hello, world, and welcome to the In My Footsteps podcast. I am Christopher Setterland, coming to you from the vacation destination known as Cape Cod, Massachusetts, and this is episode 229. Cape Cod in New England is buried under snow as the dog days of winter never end, but I'm here to try to thaw us out with a heavy dose of warm, fuzzy GenX nostalgia. We're going to kick it off with a look back at one of my favorite things about the 1990s that are surprisingly making a comeback, and that is disposable cameras. We're going to go way back in the day and look at a cartoon icon of the 60s and 70s that was way more popular than I ever thought, and that's the Pink Panther. There's going to be a brand new top 5 as we'll look at the top 5 most totally 80s TV shows ever. And there'll be a brand new This Week in History and Time Capsule, going all the way back to look at the very first Winter Olympic Games. All of that is coming up right now on episode 229 of the In My Footsteps podcast. So what are we going to talk about this week? About how this has been the snowiest winter I can remember in probably a decade on Cape Cod in New England. By the time you hear this podcast, we will be buried under a foot at least of snow. I'm not saying this podcast can thaw snow, but it'll at least distract you from it for a little while. I hope wherever you are, if it's snowed, you're shoveled out. If it's warm, I don't have anything to say to you. If you can go outside and sit in the warmth, the hell with you. No, we will get through winter together. There's only, 7 weeks left? Oh, man. Oh well, there's nothing I can do about the snow. But this week we got a lot of fun stuff on the podcast. You heard me give you the rundown. But before we get into that meat of this podcast sandwich, I can't start off the show without thanking my Patreon subscribers, Laurie, Mary Lou, Ashley, Kevin, Leo, Marguerite, Neglectoid, Crystal, Matt, Dr. Shrimp Porto Chico. Thank you all so much for being my biggest supporters, my biggest backers, the ones that literally put their money where their mouth is to support me, my content, my never-ending quest to be a self-employed content creator. If you enjoy my work and you want to support me, you can do so on patreon.com for $5 a month. You get access to bonus podcasts like the monthly podcast episodes where I review the old Initial Impressions blogs that I did 15 years ago, or my newest creation, the Hidden Track podcasts. There'll be a new one going up in a week or so, and we do the Remastered Without a Map live stream. So there's a lot of content I put up monthly for you that support me. I do have an ever-growing free tier, so you can just become a member and see some of the free stuff there, including the very first Hidden Track podcast, which was free for all. When it comes to my content, my creative escapades, we did have some news this week. I finished my script for The Cabin, my feature-length film that we're going to be shooting probably sometime later in the summer. I sent the script to the director, and he's directed more than 100 films. His reaction to my very first attempt at a script was to tell me it was seriously really good. His words, not mine. Andy told me that we could shoot probably 95% of what I have in the script without any rewrites, which I'm sure there will be some. There's no way I'm that good that I could just write a rough draft of a script and it's done. But to be told that it was good, to be told that it's feasible with the budget that we're looking at, sort of gives me confidence when it comes to possibly other scripts, and I do have other scripts that I might start working on. As soon as I clear a little spot off my plate, I'll just pile on more stuff. It's always good to get a shot of confidence from someone with a lot of experience in the industry that you're trying to kind of get your foot in the door with. So besides the script, besides the snow outside, we can get into more housekeeping stuff at the end of the podcast, because we got to get out there and we got to take some pictures. But these pictures, we won't be able to tell if they're good or terrible until they get developed. So let's go back to the 1990s now on episode 229 and look at one of my favorite things about the decade, and that was the disposable camera. These days, Everybody's smartphone has a camera, a really good camera on it, where you can take a picture, see it immediately, and if it's not good, you can take it again and again until you get it right. So for that, I am very grateful for the technology that we have now. But when I was growing up in the 80s and 90s, there were no smartphones, there were no digital cameras. You either had film cameras where you had to buy the film for it, and if you didn't have that, you were either out of luck, or in the 90s, something came around that changed the game of photography. Yet it's one of the most overlooked inventions, not just in photography, but just in general with technology. Can you imagine being someone in the 1930s and 40s with these big bulky cameras and being told that in the 1990s that their grandkids would have a disposable version of that? And that's what we're talking about here in this first segment, is the disposable camera. For people of my age and older, a little younger, it's hard to overstate how cool it was to be able to go into a store and buy a camera, and then it's, fitted with a full roll of film. You just take the pictures and then you drop the camera off at Photomat. Well, maybe not Photomat. I think those were gone. But Walgreens, CVS, Rite Aid, something like that. Get your pictures developed. Before disposable cameras, photography was still relatively exclusive. Like I said, you had to buy your own camera, which was expensive. You had to buy your own film. And not just buy your film, but know how to load it. And you needed at least basic technical knowledge. It's not the same as today where everything is point and shoot. With my smartphone, I don't really need to do much to get a good photo. The camera just knows. But before disposable cameras, if you had your own camera, you needed to know how to take photos. Otherwise, it was going to become the most expensive paperweight you ever got. By the 70s and early 80s, 35mm cameras had become more common, but they were still viewed as fragile, expensive. It created a psychological barrier. Like when you buy anything that's expensive, you're almost afraid to use it because you might damage it. So if you had to spend hundreds and hundreds of dollars on a film camera, would you want to bring it to the beach or parties or travel adventures, risking it getting damaged or stolen? The modern disposable camera was developed in Japan in the early 1980s by Fujifilm. In 1986, Fuji introduced the Utsurun Desu. It's easy for me to say. It roughly translates to "it takes pictures." I guess it describes it well. This camera came preloaded with film and was intended to be returned for processing after use. The idea was radical but simple. No film loading, no technical knowledge, cheap enough to discard or return after use. What's interesting is this first Fuji disposable camera wasn't truly disposable. After processing, manufacturers recovered the shell, replaced the film in the battery, and reused the internal components. So that means that later on, other people would use it. You were getting not only a disposable camera, but a recycled disposable camera. But it was good. It made it environmentally manageable and economical. If you can get 5-10 uses out of the body of a disposable camera, you don't have to charge as much. Seeing Fuji's success in Japan, Kodak entered the disposable camera market in 1987 with the hugely popular Kodak Fun Saver. I used many of these in the 90s. Kodak was the one that deliberately used the term disposable in marketing to emphasize convenience rather than reuse. In the 90s, you would have been able to find the Kodak Fun Saver everywhere. Drugstores, supermarkets, airports, tourist shops, wedding venues. The disposable camera became synonymous with travel, spontaneity, and carefree fun. You go have like a weekend road trip or a get-together with friends, you stop at the store, pick up chips and soda and a disposable camera. I don't remember when I first got a disposable camera. It had to be high school. So I had no idea how they worked. I just knew it was basically point and shoot. In reality, despite the seemingly simplistic setup, disposable cameras were cleverly engineered. They had a fixed-focused plastic lens, one single shutter speed, one aperture, optimized for daylight, manual film advance wheel, built-in flash on later models that were powered by a small battery. Most of these disposable cameras used 35mm film. You typically got somewhere between 24 and 27 exposures. Later on, later variations of disposable cameras had flash-enabled versions, waterproof housings, high ISO film for low light, black and white film options. The thing is, though, if you were an artistic photographer, the disposable camera was not for you. The limited technical capabilities were intentional. It's sort of like the camera on your smartphone. You don't have to have any knowledge of photography to take good photos. I see it, and I'm sure a lot of you see it all the time, especially at the beach at sunset. Everybody, every age, every gender, standing on the sand with the camera up in front of their face. You can see it now. No need to learn about the rule of thirds, depth of field, or any of that stuff. Just hold it in front of your face, click, you've got a great photo. That was the goal of disposable cameras: consistency, reliability, and ease of use. The disposable camera was at its peak in the 90s to the early 2000s, obviously kind of going downhill when smartphones first started to come out in the mid-2000s. The disposable camera was a cultural staple in travel and tourism, where you could not have to bring your expensive camera. Like I've said, cameras were still expensive then. Why bring yours and risk it getting stolen or damaged when you can get a disposable camera? You'd find them in every airport or store around the airport. You could have them at weddings and parties, where the bride and groom would sometimes have several disposable cameras sitting at each table, so you could just have people take pictures and then they would all get developed at the same time, so the guests could get candid moments from different perspectives. It's like, why hire a wedding photographer where you can just give disposables to all your friends and they can do it for you? For me as a teenager, I loved the ability to have my own camera and get pictures of friends or just scenery. It gave you a sense of authenticity with unpredictable results, which was another thing. You could get your disposable camera and go out there and take whatever 24 photos and get them back after they're developed, and you could have 20 of them be blurry or off-centered or not of what you wanted. For as much as I loved my photography class senior year of high school and using real cameras in the darkroom and the film, I do not miss that unpredictability. I have a great DSLR camera now, and I can take photos and see if they're good or if they're not good and stay where I'm at until I get it right. Back then, with a regular DSLR or a disposable camera, you take a picture of something, you have to assume you either got it right and you're confident, or you assume you didn't get it and you take several of the same thing and waste half of your roll of the disposable camera on the same tree. For as much as I say that professional photographers didn't like disposable cameras, that's not totally true, because they found a surprising place in professional photography, with the lo-fi aesthetic becoming a deliberate artistic choice. You would see it in album cover photography, street photography, documentary work that emphasized realism and immediacy. These things would force the photographer to focus on composition, timing, and storytelling rather than technical perfection. That's the same thing I say when I take photos now that don't look great. It was the storytelling rather than the perfection I was looking for. For as many amazing memories as disposable cameras made for us teenagers of the 90s, there were environmental concerns as sales peaked. Because even though manufacturers recycled many of the components, the public perception was that the disposable camera was wasteful. They saw it as a single-use product that gave plastic waste, chemical processing from the film development, battery disposal in the flash models. So in response, companies in the late 90s emphasized the recycling program and improved reuse rates. The early 2000s marked the beginning of the end for disposable cameras. The rise of digital point-and-shoot cameras, camera phones, smartphones, made instant image review and unlimited digital storage far more appealing. As much as I loved the disposable camera and all the memories of having one in the 90s, as soon as I was able to afford my own digital camera in, I think, 2001, I immediately bought one. The disposable camera didn't immediately fade away. It took until the early 2010s, because even when smartphones first came out, not many people had them. I got my first cell phone in 2003. I didn't get my first smartphone till 2011. Yes, I'm old, but still, I think a lot of people were the same way, waiting a few generations of smartphones for them to be at least a little more affordable. Something strange happened, though. Despite the prediction of extinction, disposable cameras have experienced a surprising resurgence into the 2020s. One of them is the nostalgia for analog experiences. And we're seeing this a lot more with vinyl albums, with actual physical books or DVDs coming back around CDs. As great as the digital age is, there's something more special about having the older tech. At least that's how I see it. You've also got a renewed interest in film photography among younger generations. Everything that's old is new again. You get social media trends that celebrate imperfections, which is how life should be, and just a desire for more unfiltered memories. Weddings, music festivals, and travel once again embrace the disposable camera. Brands like Fujifilm and Kodak reintroduced or continued limited production models to meet demand. If you go to, maybe not Walgreens, I know I've seen them at Best Buy, you can get disposable cameras still to this day. So looking back over 30 years, now closer to 40 years, the disposable camera's legacy extends far beyond that plastic shell. It made photography accessible to millions. That was the first way that I was able to take my own photos, was getting a disposable camera. And they were typically affordable, $10 to $15. These disposable cameras encouraged spontaneous documentation of daily life. They were also the bridging of the gap between analog and digital culture. In many ways, digital cameras anticipated the smartphone camera revolution, shifting photography away from technical mastery and toward immediacy, accessibility, and emotional connection. Just make sure you shoot doubles of everything you're trying to shoot, just in case one's blurry. And also get your photos on CD like I would do from Kodak. I still have probably a dozen photo CDs from the early 2000s. So for me, as a teenager of the 90s, the disposable camera definitely represents a pivotal moment in the history of photography and of my lifetime. It stripped away the exclusivity of photography down to its essence: point, click, and remember. This week in history, we're going back 102 years to January 25th, 1924, and the very first ever Winter Olympics. The very first Winter Olympics were held in Chamonix, France, from January 25th to February 5th, 1924. It began as a modest international winter sports competition, but it ultimately laid the foundation for one of the world's most celebrated global sporting events. Before 1924, winter sports had struggled to gain equal recognition within the Olympic movement. The Summer Olympics, that were revived in 1896 by Baron Pierre de Coubertin, dominated the international sporting calendar. Winter sports, such as skiing and ice skating, were popular in Northern Europe and North America, but they lacked a unified global platform. Figure skating appeared in the 1908 London Summer Olympics, and ice hockey debuted in the 1920 Antwerp Games. But these inclusions felt awkward and logistically difficult, with eventually cold weather nations increasingly pushing for a dedicated winter sports event. France proposed hosting an International Winter Sports Week under the patronage of the International Olympic Committee. Interestingly, despite the 1924 Winter Olympics taking place, they weren't called that. Only in 1926 did the IOC retroactively recognize the Chamonix competition as the first Winter Olympics. The town of Chamonix-Mont-Blanc, located in the French Alps near the borders of Switzerland and Italy, was already a world-famous winter resort. Nestled at the base of Mont Blanc, Western Europe's highest peak, Chamonix provided reliable winter weather, natural alpine terrain, existing tourism infrastructure, and a picturesque backdrop that symbolized winter sport. It was an ideal host despite limited technology and infrastructure compared to today's Olympics. For these first Winter Olympics, there were 16 participating nations and approximately 250 athletes, with only 11 of them being women. You had the countries of France, United States, Canada, Great Britain, Norway, Sweden, Finland, Switzerland, Austria, Italy, Belgium, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Poland, Latvia, and Yugoslavia. These 1924 Olympic Games featured 9 sports across 16 medal events. There were ice sports like figure skating, ice hockey, and speed skating, Nordic sports like cross-country skiing, Nordic combined, and ski jumping, and other events like the bobsled, curling, and military patrol, which was a precursor to the modern biathlon. The honor of winning the first ever Winter Olympic gold medal went to Charles Jutra of the United States, who won the 500-meter speed skating event on January 26, 1924. Norway emerged as the most successful nation, topping the medal table with 17 medals and 4 gold. Norwegian athletes dominated Nordic skiing events, establishing a legacy that continues today. In another sort of legacy-establishing event, Canada overwhelmed their opponents in ice hockey, outscoring them 110-3 across the tournament. Women were only allowed to compete in figure skating, reflecting the era's restrictive attitudes towards women in athletics. There were challenges to these games, as the outdoor events depended entirely on natural weather conditions, ice surfaces were uneven and vulnerable to temperature change, equipment was primitive by modern standards, and athletes often competed in multiple events with minimal rest. Despite these difficulties, the games were widely praised for their organization and sportsmanship. As I said, these weren't officially recognized as the first Olympic Games until 1926, but the success of the 1924 Winter Olympics led directly to the creation of the 1928 Winter Olympics in Saint-Mortier, Switzerland. The Winter Olympics in Chamonix, France were more than just a sporting event. They represented a cultural and athletic milestone, proving that winter sports deserve their own global stage. And those first Winter Olympics took place 102 years ago, this week in history. And now I'll try to get a gold medal in a new time capsule. For this one, we're going to go back 62 years to January 29th, 1964. This would be during the Winter Olympics in Austria. What was going on in the world of pop culture back then? Well, let's find out. The number 1 song was There, I've Said It Again by Bobby Vinton. This was off of Bobby Vinton's album of the same name, There, I've Said It Again. It spent 4 weeks at number 1 and is kind of a footnote in history, as it was replaced at number 1 by the Beatles' first ever number 1 song in America, I Want to Hold Your Hand. So the Bobby Vinton song is the last US number 1 hit before the British invasion began. This song could be seen as Bobby Vinton's biggest hit, or you could say it was the song Blue Velvet, which came out in 1963. Bobby Vinton is a pretty big deal in the world of music, as in his career he has sold 75 million albums and singles combined worldwide. The number 1 movie was Dr. Strangelove, and you could get into the theater with a ticket costing 93 cents. This is Stanley Kubrick's political black comedy satire film, parodying Cold War fears at the time. It starred Peter Sellers and George C. Scott. was nominated for 4 Academy Awards, is 98% fresh on Rotten Tomatoes, and was a modest hit at the box office, making about $10 million on a budget of $2 million. The number 1 TV show was The Beverly Hillbillies. This is the sitcom about the Clampett family that strike oil on their land and they move to Beverly Hills. It was on for a total of 9 seasons and 274 episodes between 1962 and 1971. This is the classic fish out of water show where banker Mr. Drysdale tries to civilize the Clampetts, trying to get them to stop foolishly spending their money. Since doing this podcast in general, I have come to realize that the Beverly Hillbillies was a way bigger and more popular show in the 60s than I would have thought. And if you were around back then, January 29th, 1964, perhaps in between watching events in the Winter Olympics on TV, you need to run to the store and get some stuff. Well, you're in luck because there is a big sale going on at Kmart this week. You could get such needed things as seamless mesh nylons for 28 cents each, boxes of chocolate-covered cherries for 73 cents, plastic army soldiers for 7 cents each, limit of 10, milk of magnesia for 63 cents, and because apparently this was the case in the 60s, you could get baked ham at Kmart for 88 cents a pound. I don't know if it's any better at Kmart than food would be at Walmart, but that's up to you to decide. So that wraps up another time capsule, another This Week in History. I mentioned how the Beverly Hillbillies were such a huge show in the 60s. Well, what we're going to do now is look at the most 80s shows that I could find, and we'll go through all of them in a brand new top 5. So this is one of those top 5s that could kind of be defined in a lot of different ways. When I say the most 80s TV shows, I think of the ones that just scream 80s. You look at them and you know when they were from, you know they could probably only be made in that decade. They make sense to be from the 80s. When trying to do research for this segment, I put in the most 80s shows and I was getting most popular. That's not what I'm looking at here. There is one show that led off this whole thing, and it's in the top 5, and when I get to it, you'll see maybe a little better what I mean by most 80s shows. And in the future, I'm likely going to do the most whatever shows from different decades, most 70s shows, all that. So let's see if my examples here make this segment make sense. As with most of these top 5s, they're in no particular order. I have some honorable mentions. We're going to do a deep dive into the 80s TV shows, into the deep end of the pool. So let's just get into it. Enough of my trying to describe what I was going for. So, honorable mentions for most 80s TV shows include The Golden Girls, 4 older single ladies living in Miami, Florida, going through their lives in their late 50s, 60s, or in Sophia's case, 80s. I don't know, they dealt with a lot of things that were relevant to the 80s. Maybe that's why I chose it. Another honorable mention is Who's the Boss? A show about a working mother, the head of the household, and her male housekeeper. Tony Maselli, played by Tony Danza, who played Tony in basically every show. I guess it made it easy to remember his lines. I thought of this as the working woman being something that really came to the forefront in the 80s, strong, powerful working women. Another honorable mention is MacGyver, known for creating weapons out of everyday household items, random things. A banana peel, paperclip, and rubber band can somehow blow up a car. I don't think that was in any episode. Another honorable mention is the A-Team. Everything about this show screams 80s, from Mr. T to the van to the music. But I think it's mostly Mr. T. He is just so 80s, with his mohawk and his chains and his I pity the fool. And the final honorable mention is Alf. aka Alien Life Form, aka Gordon Shumway, the alien who eats cats. It's like a 60s acid trip, but in the 80s, so maybe a cocaine trip. But those are my honorable mentions for the most 80s TV shows. Do any of those stand out to you as just shows that scream 80s? Well, like I said, there was one that was the beginning of this whole segment. And I'm going to start off the top 5, and this will probably make it all make sense, or maybe I'm overthinking it. But let's start off most 80s TV shows with number 1, Miami Vice. I know that I always say these are in no particular order, but I would honestly say this is the most 80s show ever. The music, the cars, the clothes especially. Don Johnson and Philip Michael Thomas in their white suits with the pastel shirts. Crockett and Tubbs as Miami detectives. The show was on for 5 seasons, 114 episodes from 1984 to 89. Another thing that screams 80s about this show is that the Miami Vice theme song went to number 1. Could you imagine any TV show having their theme song go to number 1? And I'm not talking about songs that had lyrics, I'm talking about just music. Glenn Frey from the Eagles had the song You Belong to the City that was also in Miami Vice, which led to the Miami Vice TV show soundtrack spending 11 weeks at number 1 on the album charts. Number 2 is Knight Rider. This is another just screams 80s. David Hasselhoff screams 80s. Kit the talking car screams 80s. The show was on for 4 seasons, 90 total episodes from 1982 to 1986. It is one of my very first favorite shows from my childhood, mostly because of Kit. Knight Industries 2000 is what Kit stood for. A killer black Pontiac Trans Am with William Daniels as the voice of Kit. Anytime I think of Knight Rider, I immediately think of my friends John and Barry. There's a reason why, and I'm going to embarrass mostly John. In high school, my family, my mother, had this blue station wagon that had the door that would open up from the back. And there was a way that we could close the door, but also, I guess, have it kind of be open so that I'd be driving and the light would be on that would say door open, but it wouldn't be open. And John figured this out, so he'd be laying in the back seat, pushing on the door, making that light go on and off, and he would pretend he was Kit, just yelling at me, telling me to stop driving crazy. Like, that was 30 years ago, and I can still hear John's voice in my head just screaming, "Michael, no, what are you doing?" And the red light would be flashing on the dashboard. But yes, the talking car, David Hasselhoff as Michael Knight, the undercover LAPD officer, it just screams 80s. Number 3 is Dynasty. This is the primetime soap opera that was on for 9 seasons and 222 episodes from 1981 to 1989. This show was created by Aaron Spelling, and it revolves around the wealthy Carrington family in Denver, Colorado. It starred John Forsythe, Linda Evans, Joan Collins. This is a totally 80s show, mostly because of the clothing that you see the women wear in the show. Lots of shoulder pads. The show was a massive hit, though, being nominated for the Golden Globe for Best Drama Television Series every year from 1981 to 86, ultimately winning it in 1984. Number 4 is Family Ties.
There ain't no nothing we can't love each other through. What would we do, baby?
I could say this was a totally 80s show just because it was the star-making performance from Michael J. Fox. But I think it's more totally 80s because of the dynamic between the aging hippie parents and the young conservative son. In general, this show was on for 7 seasons, 176 total episodes between 1982 and 1989. What I'm just figuring out now, and I didn't do this intentionally, but all of these shows, at least in the actual top 5, calling them most 80s, they all only ran during the 80s. There's no 70s or 90s overlaps. I think in the honorable mentions, Golden Girls and Who's the Boss were in the 90s as well. But the actual top 5, they're all just 80s, which is an unexpected coincidence. But Family Ties, it's the Keaton family, Steve and Elise, the hippie parents, Alex P. Keaton as the conservative Reaganomics son, Mallory and Jennifer, the kids, until then later at the end, Andy gets born to change the dynamics. He didn't ruin the show like Cousin Oliver did with the Brady Bunch, but I didn't enjoy the Andy years as much as the earlier ones. And finally, number 5 on the list of most 80s TV shows is Magnum P.I. Tom Selleck's mustache is the 80s part of this. Tom Selleck as Thomas Magnum, who's obviously a PI, private investigator, living in Hawaii. It's, again, the style, the clothing, the mustache, like I said, the cars. The show was on for 8 seasons, 162 episodes from 1980 to 1988, completing the 5 for 5 of shows that were only on in the 80s, which is just so fitting. All 5 of these shows were, at one point or another, massive hits when they were on the air. Now, I could have really dug deep and found obscure shows that were probably more symbolic of the 80s, but I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to pick out some show that was on for like 15 episodes and nobody's heard of it and like, well, it was totally 80s, go find it. So what do you think of my top 5? Do you agree that these are the most 80s shows ever? Miami Vice, Knight Rider, Dynasty, Family Ties, Magnum P.I., or are there some others that I missed? Like I said, I'm going to do other decades where I'll find the shows that are most symbolic of that decade, but I have to start with the 80s. That's my childhood. So kind of a mind-blowing fact, at least in my thoughts, was the impetus for this segment of the podcast. In doing research, I have found that there's likely somewhere around 100 YouTube channels that have more than 1 billion total views. I'm not going to go through the effort of researching all the different ones. You could probably figure out on your own who some of the biggest YouTube creators are. But that's not the point of this segment of the podcast. One of these channels belongs to a cartoon character that I guess in my mind fell under the radar. I don't think it did for others that are probably older than me. But what if I told you that one of these channels on YouTube that has more than 1 billion views showcases only videos of the Pink Panther cartoons? It blew my mind. This was going back probably 6 months. I started getting Pink Panther videos in my recommendeds on YouTube, probably because I like Looney Tunes. And I was like, Pink Panther, why would I watch that? I'm not a big fan. And then I started seeing these videos of the Pink Panther had hundreds of millions of views. I'm not kidding. Go to the channel and look up the most viewed videos. They're up there in 100, 150 million views. Most of them have tens of millions. So obviously just because he flew under the radar with me and I only think of the Pink Panther with Owens Corning the insulation, doesn't mean that he wasn't a big deal as far as people that grew up in the 60s and 70s. And in doing my research, I have found the Pink Panther is one of the most recognizable and enduring animated characters in pop culture. You instantly know who he is with his lanky pink body, sly smile, wordless, usually wordless humor. Even if you didn't know the Pink Panther and the cartoons, you would immediately recognize the music. Yes, that is one of the most recognizable pieces of, I guess it's jazz, music ever. I'm sure using that clip on the podcast will be fine, but when this gets shared to YouTube, we'll see if I get a copyright strike. So, the Pink Panther made his first appearance in 1963, but not as the star of a cartoon series, but in the opening credits of the live-action film The Pink Panther. This film was directed by Blake Edwards and starred Peter Sellers as Inspector Jacques Clouseau. There's a funny connection. I mentioned that I like Looney Tunes cartoons, which is why I got recommended the Pink Panther. Well, the animated Pink Panther was created by legendary animation duo Friz Freleng of Looney Tunes and David DePatie. The character the Pink Panther was named after the film's fictional diamond, the Pink Panther. What ended up happening, though, was audiences immediately gravitated towards the animated cat rather than the jewel or the human characters. So for those of you that might not know who the Pink Panther is, the Pink Panther is tall, thin, entirely pink. He does minimal facial features, like he's not very expressive. He's usually fluid and graceful in his movements, with a strong influence from modernist animation and graphic design. If you watch any of the cartoons, he typically tortures this one character just called the Little Man with a giant nose and mustache. And he's clever, mischievous, the Pink Panther, calm, even in chaos. He's playfully antagonistic and not usually aggressive. Like there's one cartoon where he's trying to paint this little man's house totally pink while the man is trying to keep painting it. I think it's a shade of blue. One of the Pink Panther's defining traits is that he almost never speaks. The humor is conveyed entirely through his body language, facial expressions, and visual gags, usually through the little man flipping out over what the Pink Panther's doing. It is said that the Pink Panther is kind of in the tradition of classic silent film comedians like Buster Keaton and Charlie Chaplin. Getting back to the music for a moment, the song was composed by Henry Mancini and released in 1963 with the film. The Pink Panther theme won 3 Grammy Awards, and it basically perfectly matches the character. And so now, I'm sure when you heard that theme, you could picture the Pink Panther. Due to the character's popularity, the Pink Panther show debuted in 1964, just a year after the movie came out. It originally aired on NBC, later ABC. It became one of the first Saturday morning staples. It fit right into the MO of the Pink Panther character. Slapstick humor, visual comedy, minimal dialogue, usually some kind of elaborate problem-solving scenario. There would be clever visual puzzles, long setups that led to ironic payoffs. But of course, as with most famous cartoon shows, they had to have these like spin-off characters that had their own cartoon segments, like the Inspector, who was based on Inspector Clouseau, but then other ones like Roland and Ratfink, the Ant and the Aardvark. It's like in the 80s when they had Garfield and Friends and they had that terrible U.S. Acres cartoons in there. Like, just get rid of that. I don't want to see that junk. Just give me more Garfield. The Pink Panther is an Academy Award-winning cartoon, winning the award in 1964 for the Best Animated Short Film for The Pink Fink. There have been multiple Emmy nominations and continual syndication through the 70s and 80s. What's interesting is that a lot of these first-run Pink Panther cartoons that were on Saturday mornings in the 60s and 70s would eventually be put in theaters before other films. Kind of a full circle, since the Pink Panther started off as kind of a throwaway segment at the beginning of a movie. The DePatie Freeling Pink Panther cartoons, there were 124 of them between 1964 and 1980. Those are the classics. Those are the ones that if you go to the Pink Panther YouTube channel, you will see have millions and millions of views. And I wasn't kidding about the number of views. If you go to Official Pink Panther on YouTube, the channel has almost 23 million subscribers. More than 1,000 videos have totaled well over 13 billion views. This is one of those subjects that obviously went over my head. I had no idea how big the Pink Panther was. I'm sure some of you listening that are older in your later 50s and 60s are hearing me talk about this saying, yeah, duh, Pink Panther was huge. And if you're wondering, the most viewed Pink Panther video is called Pink Panther versus Big Nose at the Arcade. It only has 440 million views. The Pink Panther that I remember was the one that was the, mascot for the Owens Corning insulation. It's been a staple of those commercials since 1980. I don't know if they're around anymore. I don't really watch commercials in the 2020s because you've heard me say they all stink. But the commercials for Owens Corning went something like this.
Aha, there's a thief in this attic. This skimpy amount of insulation can rob you blind on your fuel bill.
Fight back with the attic blanket from Owens Corning. It's the thickest, most powerful roll of pink insulation you can add. It can help you save money on your fuel bill.
And there you go. There's dozens, at least multiple dozens of commercials like that for Owens Corning with the Pink Panther. It's not strictly a 60s and 70s cartoon, though. In 1993, the Pink Panther was revived with updated animation and more dialogue, including voice acting by Matt Frewer, who 80s kids might remember as Max Headroom. Have I done a segment on Max Headroom on this show? I don't think I have, so I guess that's coming up in the future. Even though there were new cartoons made in the 90s, many longtime fans felt that those cartoons lacked the subtlety and charm of the original shorts, especially with the Pink Panther talking. In the 21st century, the Pink Panther continues to have appearances in animated specials. There's licensing deals for clothing, toys, and home decor. There's video games. The character proved that silent visual comedy could still succeed in the television age. It helped to popularize minimalist animation design. The Pink Panther set a standard for character-driven humor without dialogue, and became a symbol of cool and clever rebellion. I'm sure you could find Pink Panther lunchboxes, album covers, clothing, the Owens Corning advertising campaigns. If you've never seen the original Pink Panther cartoons, you know who the character is, whether through the music or if you see an image of it, you know what it is. So what gives this character such longevity to have a YouTube channel in the 2020s with more than 13 billion views? You could say it's timeless humor. There's universal appeal across languages and cultures because there's no words. It's a perfect marriage of music, design, and personality, humor that respects the audience's intelligence. And the Pink Panther does seem to be almost out of time. The cartoons that are from the mid-60s, if you watch them now, the humor still works. There's not a lot of Pink Panther cartoons that need hard edits to get rid of the humor that does not age well. So what began as a stylish animated title sequence in a film became one of the most iconic cartoon characters of all time. The Pink Panther's success lies in his simplicity. No catchphrases, no exposition, no forced jokes, just clever animation, impeccable timing, and one unforgettable theme song. More than 60 years after his debut, the Pink Panther remains a masterclass in how less can truly be more. And that is seen in the 23 million subscribers on YouTube and the 13 billion views his videos have over there. But until next week, that'll wrap up episode 229 of the In My Footsteps podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed your weekly dose of GenX nostalgia. I hope it helped you forget about the snow. If you live in about half of this country, there's snow everywhere. I'll do my best to keep you warm through the winter. We're going to continue it next week with episode 230, which is the first one of the month of February, the month of love, or at least that's how they market it with Valentine's Day. But I'm going to make it all about love on the podcast as well. We're going to start it off by looking at the Love Connection TV show. We're going to look back at some forgotten TV shows from 1980s ESPN. These will likely be things that they tried to pass off as sports that weren't sports, like spelling bees and darts. And in honor of the Super Bowl, there'll be a brand new top 5 looking at the best Super Bowl commercials ever, which I'm going to have such a hard time researching. It's going to be so hard to watch awesome commercials. But that's coming up next week on episode 230 of the In My Footsteps podcast. Find me all over social media. Check out my Facebook fan page, subscribe on YouTube, find me on Instagram, Threads, TikTok, Blue Sky. Read the Initial Impressions 2.0 blog, my weekly look back at my wacky life. Go to my homepage, ChristopherSutherland.com, to see links to any of my 10 books. If you want to see my acting debut, check out the link in the description of the podcast for Cape Cod Cthulhu, the movie that was my acting debut as I played myself, the podcaster. If you've made it this far, I think you might enjoy my content. If you want to support me, you can become a member on Patreon for $5 a month. You can also support me on Buy Me a Coffee. Those are as low as $1. Of course, the best way to support any content creator is to share what they do. I market and promote myself the most out of anybody. But it always means a lot when people who aren't me tell others to check my stuff out. And if you're new to the podcast and you're snowed in, this is episode 229. There's a whole lot that you can binge to pass the time away that you are stuck inside with a foot or more of snow outside. Don't worry, spring will be here soon enough. Well, maybe not soon enough, but eventually it will be. But in the meantime, lean into the things that make you happy. If you can't get outside and get that vitamin D because there's too much snow and it's freezing, just lean into the things that make you happy. Favorite foods, favorite people, favorite podcasts, favorite shows to binge on Netflix. And I'll be here to try to get you through the dog days of winter, whether it's through this podcast, the Patreon podcast, YouTube videos, blogs. I've got so much content. This is the content creator era of my life and has been for over 5 years. But until next week, when there's hopefully a little less snow, remember, in this life, don't walk in anyone else's footsteps, create your own path, and enjoy every moment you can on this journey we call life, because you never know what tomorrow brings. Thank you all again for tuning in. This is the In My Footsteps podcast. I am Christopher Sutherland, but you already knew that. And I'll talk to you all again soon.